Hey, what's up, Silas here. So today I'm going to be reading this book, and you can see the title there. It's Leninism and Contemporary Problems of the Transition from Capitalism to Socialism by Zarodov. So this is a book I found. I was looking through some of my parents' old things, and this is more towards that whole thing that people say, oh, the problems in the West, capitalism is not working. Look at all the problems in the West. And they talk about all like, oh, they never really mention about the socialism and what socialist countries really are. Or you talk about places like Venezuela and they're like, oh, that's not real socialism. And on top of that, there's a whole thing where some people who have actually looked into this are saying like, hey, some of the actual planks, some of the main foundational goals or the main goals of communism, of socialism, have actually been enacted in the West already. So with this book, I just want to go through the introduction right now, and because I thought it was kind of interesting. They're talking about actually switching from capitalism to socialism, which I do believe has been actually going on. So whether you want to say it's cultural Marxism or just Marxism and capitalism, socialism and collectivism and communism in and of itself, trying to infiltrate the West and change it around, or whichever way you want to think about it, I think the reading of this book should be kind of interesting. I haven't actually read the book yet. I'm just going to go in here and just read the intro and maybe some of the first chapter. But yeah, so the first page is right here. It says, the International Communist and Working Class Movement, with the progress sign. You can see that sign right there, progress. So this whole progressive thing, it's language and terms that are used within collectivism, communism, these kind of things. So you shouldn't be surprised to see them. When they say progressive, there's other there's other things that come to life that it calls out when I hear that term, and I think you should actually associate it with some other things. Progress Publishers from Moscow. This was actually published in Russia. So collusion. This book is collusion. This might be a connection. If this book is found, they might be able to say that I'm colluding with Russians in order to create this video and sow discontent among the masses and things like that, or whatever. I don't know. So some Russian text here. The first printing of this was in 1972, and the second printing was 1976. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. This is something that has been going on for a while. This is nothing new. So this is 72. It's almost 50 years ago this has been going for. So yeah, I'll just go read through the contents and things, just let you know what the chapters are. So if you guys are interested in tracking down this book and finding it, well, then it might even be online and things by now. So now I'm going to read the chapters, the contents here, the table of contents, and kind of the subheadings of the chapters. And you guys, if you want to find this book, you could probably find it online. But if not, probably find it in your library or somewhere if you were really interested in reading this. But okay, here we go. So there's an introduction. Then chapter 1, the formulation of the problem. And the subheading 1 is Marx and Engels and the remaking of society. Subheading 2, Lenin on the ways of struggle for socialism. Subheading 3, the Communist parties on the forms of transition to socialism. Now, chapter 2 is substance and content of the contemporary epoch. Subheading 1, socioeconomic formations and historical epochs. Subheading 2, the features of our epoch. Subheading 3, dynamism of the epoch and the helplessness of its critics. Subheading 4, decisive force in the struggle for the transition to socialism. Chapter 3 is Laws of the Revolution and Revolutionary Creative Work. Subheading 1, Objective Factors. Subheading 2, Subjective Conditions. Subheading 3, General Laws. Subheading 4, The Distinctive Character of the Transition. And subheading 5, The Role of Historical Experience. Now, chapter 4 is Problems of the Socialist Revolution. Subheading 1, The Theory of the Development of the Revolution. Subheading 2, Forms of the Revolution. Subheading 3, Lessons of the Revolutions in Russia. Subheading 4, Specifics of the Revolutions in different countries. Chapter 5 is Problems of Socialist Construction. Subheading 1, Inevitability and Substance of the Transition Period. Subheading 2, Science of the Socialist Construction. Subheading 3, Socialist Construction in the Different Countries. Subheading 4, Laws of World Socialism. Now, Chapter 6 is The Prospects of the Revolutionary Process. Subheading 1, The Principal Revolutionary Force. Subheading 2, Class Battles in the Citadels of Imperialism. Class Heading 3, National Liberation Movement. And Subheading 4, Socialist Foreign Policy and the Revolutionary Process. And then to close off the book, it's in lieu of a conclusion. So just from those headings and subheadings, you might be able to actually think about things that are going on in society and be like, maybe this might be about this and this might be about that. And as I said, you could probably try to find this book if you'd like to find out more about it. I'm going to get into the introduction now. Here we go. Introduction. Nothing is more momentous in the life of mankind than the birth of a new social system. Under the impact of the revolutionary hammer, the practices that have taken shape over the centuries are crumbling. Hated institutions and traditions are disappearing, and the face of society is being transformed and renewed. The road is opening for an upsurge of the productive forces, and human genius is beginning a new round in the battle for the improving of nature with the promise of greater successes than at any other time in history. How is a new system born? What roads lead to it in the labyrinth of the social process? These problems have stirred and are still stirring the finest minds. Our generation is both the witness and the prime mover of an exciting, eventful period in history. The grandiose revolutionary transformations that have taken place in social life and in science and technology have affected social development in all the continents. The last of the exploiter systems, capitalism, is moving towards inescapable collapse. Translated from a beautiful dream into tangible reality, socialism has become a powerful accelerator of the historical process, a force exercising an increasingly decisive influence on the course of world development. After the First Russian Revolution from 1905 to 1907, Vladimir Lenin wrote that the coming epoch would see Marxism blaze into greater triumph than ever before. His prophetic words have come true. The Great October Socialist Revolution of 1917 in Russia marked the commencement of a new epoch in world history, the epoch of transition from capitalism to socialism and communism. Supported by the proletariat of the whole world, the working people of Russia built the first socialist state in history. As a result of fascism's defeat in the Second World War and the growth of the working class and national liberation movements, the working people have scored monumental achievements. Thanks to aid from the Soviet Union, new socialist states have sprung up. A world socialist system has come into being. It is steadily growing stronger and crowding capitalism in all spheres of present-day society. At the same time, capitalism is being eroded by other powerful torrents of the global revolution. Increasing momentum is being acquired by the working class movement in the developed capitalist countries and by the national liberation movement in countries of the Third World. The teaching of scientific socialism is penetrating all parts of the globe. Millions upon millions of people in all the continents see the practical achievements of socialism in economic, scientific, and cultural development. In the rising standard of living and in the promotion of all capabilities and talents of the individual. These advantages of the new society of socialism and communism are today visible to more and more millions of ordinary people on the planet. The economic, sociopolitical, and spiritual relations in the contemporary society are such that mankind cannot advance without sweeping away imperialism and establishing socialism and communism. This is the demand of history. These conditions accentuate the questions of how various countries are to achieve the transition from capitalism to socialism, and of the means ensuring the consolidation of socialist relations. It is therefore not accidental that the world communist movement attaches such immense importance to precisely these problems of the struggle for socialism. Problems related to the transition from capitalism to socialism acquired prominence at the initial period of the emergence of Marxist theory, from the very first steps to the revolutionary struggle of the working class. Naturally, they received increasing attention with the development of the revolutionary theory itself and its practical realization in socialist and communist construction. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were the first to adopt a scientific approach to the ways and forms of achieving the transition from capitalism to socialism. An outstanding role in developing the teaching on the transition to socialism in its practical application was played by Lenin. It was Lenin who analyzed a new epoch, the epoch of imperialism, and evolved a new theory of the socialist revolution. Under his leadership, this teaching was given practical embodiment in the Russia of 1917, with her multi-structural economy and intricate intermingling of class and political problems. It was under Lenin's leadership that the building of the world's first socialist state of workers and peasants was started. Drawing upon the experience of the revolution and the initial years of socialist construction, Lenin showed other countries the way to effect the transition from capitalism to socialism. Leninism is the supreme achievement of scientific thinking and socialist practice. A great international teaching, it is the Marxism of the contemporary epoch. Using the ideas propounded by Lenin, the Communist and Workers' parties, the whole world communist movement are creatively enlarging on his teaching, using it as a guideline for their theoretical and practical revolutionary work. Many books dealing with the transition from capitalism to socialism were published in the USSR in the 1950s and 1960s. Most of them are devoted to the philosophical, economic, or political aspects of the subject. This book reviews the subject chiefly from the historical and party aspects on the basis of works by Marx, Engels, and Lenin. Documents from the CPSU, particularly in the 20th and 25th Congresses, documents of the Comintern and of the 1957, 1960, and 1969 international meetings of the Communist and Workers' parties, and other documents of the communist and working class movement. Furthermore, it examines the work of prominent figures in the communist movement. The author critically scrutinizes the views propounded by bourgeois and social democratic researchers, and also right and quote left unquote opportunist and revisionist notions on the problems of the transition from capitalism to socialism. He has striven not only to lay bare the scientific untenability of anti-Marxist concepts, but to show that the entire history of the international communist movement, the whole history of the struggle for the transition from capitalism to socialism and the building of a socialist society strikingly demonstrates that in revolutionary activity, success attends those who faithfully abide by the theory of Marxism-Leninism. He has striven not only to lay bare the scientific untenability of anti-Marxist concepts, but to show that the entire history of the international communist movement, the whole history of the struggle for the transition from capitalism to socialism and the building of a socialist society, strikingly demonstrates that in revolutionary activity success attends those who faithfully abide by the theory of Marxism-Leninism and uncompromisingly oppose distortions of that theory, and conversely, that failure and error are the inevitable lot of those who depart from Marxism-Leninism or pervert it. One of the author's claims was to trace the practice of class struggle and the course of society's socialist transformation, and examine current problems in the revolutionary transformative activity of the Marxist-Leninist parties. For that reason, this book is chiefly an exposition and a study of general theoretical and general methodological problems. Hence the relatively limited use of concrete historical material, which only bears out the general theoretical and methodological propositions put forward by the author. This approach is consistent with the Marxist-Leninist requirement that phenomena must be studied in all their wealth, diversity, multiform links, and manifestations. Another reason making this approach important is that fairly extensive experience has been accumulated, which requires a systematic generalization and analysis. So that's it for the introduction, and I'm probably going to read just some of the first chapter, which is formulation of the problem, to kind of set up kind of what they're kind of going for. And just some terms already in here, just going at the end here, when they're talking about how this approach is consistent with the Marxist-Leninist requirement that the phenomena must be studied in all their wealth, diversity, multiform links, and manifestations. Now, that is intersectionality. That is just intersectionality. That's what they're talking about here. They're talking about how everything is connected. You have to talk about all these things in all the different diverse ways that it actually builds. And it's just really interesting seeing them actually talk about this in this kind of sense when we know the results of this. We know what happened to the USSR, but they're talking about this like it's such a grand, powerful thing. And when people talk about, oh, we're not talking about socialism, we're not talking about communism, we're just talking about this and this. Social democrats are different. Even here, he's already throwing some side-eye towards the social democrats here. He's saying the author critically scrutinizes the views propounded by the bourgeois and the social democratic researchers. So they're saying, yeah, you social democrats, we don't really buy you. Like, you have to buy in completely to the Marxism-Leninism thing. And I think some people actually do. I mean, most people actually do. They kind of tell you, oh, we're just social democrats. Oh, we don't want all the way. But they want communism. It is the end goal. They might not just come out and admit it, but that's what they want. And I find it interesting here. And also right and quote left, unquote left. I mean, sorry, right, and then they have the left in quotation marks, because I think they might be some side-eye here again, where they're like, oh yeah, you're so-called people on the left. And there's a lot of that thing going on right now with the people on the right, conservatives and people like that, who are saying the rhinos, Republicans in names only. I think here it would be something like linos, like leftists in names only, like Leninists in name only, where they're like, yeah, sure, you're on the left, but no, if you're on the left, you are a communist. That's what these people are saying, I think. And that's why they're saying, okay, these people on the left, yeah, quote unquote leftists. So there's some interesting things just in the introduction already. I don't know if I'm actually going to read this entire book, because I am somewhat familiar with how these communist tendencies have spread in the West, and how the Cold War was just continued in a different way. Just got, it's like a sub-zero war. What would it go to? Like a lukewarm war, or like an ether war, an idea war, where it wasn't necessarily with the threat of actually bombing each other anymore. But the battle of ideas most definitely has continued, and communism and socialism have made very many inroads into the capitalist. And people were studying this for a while and have been putting a lot of work into this. And I think it's kind of a good thing to just know what's going on and what the people have in store for people who don't like communism and collectivism. And there's a part in here they're talking about how communism is for the individual, and No, it's not. No, it's just not. Okay, so let me go into reading some of the chapter 1, formulation of the problem. The task of overthrowing the capitalist system by revolution and replacing it with a socialist system came to the fore when, as a social and economic formation, capitalism began to lose its progressive significance and became a hindrance to social advancement. However, it took decades of revolutionary struggle by the working people and dedicated creative labor by mankind's finest minds before the historical need for socialism was clearly and scientifically substantiated and converted into the invincible theory of the socialist revolution. The foundation of this theory was laid by the great creators of scientific socialism, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Vladimir Lenin brilliantly enlarged on this theory in the conditions of imperialism and evolved an integral teaching of the socialist revolution, of the struggle for socialism, and of its triumph on a worldwide scale. Today, while rejecting the efforts of the opportunists to distort the actual trends of world development and conceal the revolutionary nature of our epoch, the world communist movement is creatively enriching Lenin's concept. In their turn, the successes of the revolutionary movement, which are changing the face of the modern world, are introducing corrections into revolutionary theory and helping to perfect and develop it. Thus, the evolution of the problems of the transition from capitalism to socialism has gone through several phases. Inseparably linked with the elaboration and historical development of the entire theory, strategy, and tactics of the revolutionary struggle. Marx and Engels on the remaking of society. Some 130 years have elapsed since Marx and Engels laid the foundation of their teaching. These years have borne out the correctness and strength of his teaching. Enriched and enlarged by the great Lenin, Marxism is today exercising a growing influence on the entire course of human history. Marx and Engels gave the working people an unconquerable weapon in the battle against exploiters for socialism. It is not fortuitous that though it has been repeatedly buried under its enemies, Marxism struggles to remain in the center of the ideological struggle, stirring revolutionary enthusiasm in the working people and invoking the rage and hate of their class enemies. The basic problems of the transition from capitalism to socialism are propounded in many ways of the founders of Marxism, including Manifesto of the Communist Party, Address of the Central Committee to the Communist League, The Class Struggles in France, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, the Civil War in France, and in the documents of the First and Second Internationals, most of which are written personally by Marx and Engels, with their direct participation or their initiative. The founders of Marxism regarded the socialist revolution as a process entailing the forcible overthrow of capitalist power and the transfer of power to the proletariat, the dismantling of the bourgeois state machine, and the setting up of institutions through which the proletariat could exercise its political power. In the broad sense, the word socialist revolution implied the establishment of socialist relations of production, the gradual abolition of class society and its contradictions, the removal of the existing division of labor, and the eradication of the contradictions between town and countryside. Marx and Engels worked out the theory of two stages of communist society. They indicated that the transition from capitalism to the first stage of communism, i.e. socialism, would embrace a certain period of history. This period of fundamental social changes could only be one of the dictatorship or the proletariat, a period in which society's economic, political, and cultural life would be characterized by a number of specific features. Brilliant practitioners and skillful organizers of the working class movement, Marx and Engels headed the first international associations of the proletariat. They devoted much of their energy and time to the publication of newspapers, thereby helping to prepare the working class for the revolutionary battles. They took a direct part in class battles, helping the revolutionary workers to organize. They wrote a vast number of works on the tactics of the working class movement at different stages of the revolutionary struggle and in the specific conditions of different countries, profoundly analyzing the practical revolutionary activity of the masses and their organizations. This analysis of practice enabled them to enrich revolutionary theory. Yet the adversaries of Marxism assert that Marx and Engels were only theoreticians, far removed from the real problems of the revolutionary practice. Now on to the point that is given here, the footnotes. Here before, saying a stinging rebuff was given to the adversaries of Marxism by Lenin when in 1907, having in mind Marx's attitude to the revolution of 1848, he wrote, "No, gentlemen, this is the combination of revolutionary theory and revolutionary policy." And further, how our present realist wiseacres among the Marxists who in 1906 to 1907 are deriding revolutionary romanticism in Russia would have sneered at Marx at the time, how people would have scoffed a materialist, an economist, an enemy of utopias who pays homage to the attempt to storm heaven. This is from Vladimir Ilyanovich. I don't know what the I stands for. I'm sorry. Lenin, Collected Works, Volume 12, page 107. Okay, so back to the reading. The revolutionary theory evolved by Marx and Engels mirrored the experience of the struggle of the working class in different countries, and this made it invincible. Let us examine the attitude of Marx and Engels to the revolutionary potentialities of Russia. This is important because efforts are being made to pass over or distort their views on this question. Marx and Engels searchingly analyzed the prospects for the development of the revolutionary movement in Russia, examining the situation in Russia in the light of the general laws of the revolutionary struggle as discovered by them and taking into account the specifics of Russian reality. They stressed the revolutionary significance of the struggle for the abolition of serfdom and for the national rights of those peoples enslaved by Tsarism. As early as 1858, Marx wrote that in Russia, quote, inflammable material has accumulated under her own feet, which a strong blast from the west may suddenly set on fire, unquote. In connection with the Polish National Liberation Uprising in 1863, he drew the conclusion that, quote, in Europe, the era of revolution has broadly reopened, unquote. Later in the mid-1880s, Engels repeatedly noted that Russia was the key to the successful accomplishment of the revolution in Europe, and that, possibly, the first European revolution would take place in Russia. In a letter to August Bebel on December 11th to 12th, 1884, he wrote that, quote, as things are at present, an impulse from outside can scarcely come from anywhere but Russia, unquote. Quote, what I know or believe I know about the situation in Russia makes me think that the Russians are approaching their 1789. The revolution must break out there within a given time. It may break out any day. In these circumstances, the country is like a charged mine, which only needs a match to be applied to it, unquote. This is from a letter from Engels to Vera Zasulich on April 23rd to 1885. To Paul Lafargue, Engels wrote on October 25th to 26th, 1886, quote, if revolution were to break out in Russia, that would create the most propitious combination of circumstances possible, unquote. Some months later, he said he believed that, quote, it really looks like the beginning of the end in Russia, and this will be the beginning of the end in Europe, unquote. Quote, a revolution in Russia today would save Europe from the calamity of world war and lay the beginning of a worldwide social revolution, unquote. He wrote to Nadege on January 4th, 1888. Engels' conclusion that in Russia revolution was approaching was a testimony to his splendid understanding of the conditions obtaining in Russia. Quote, to me, the important thing is that the impulse of Russia should be given, that the revolution should break out. Whether this faction or that faction gives the signal, whether it happens under this flag or that, is a matter of complete indifference to me. If it were a palace conspiracy, it would be swept away tomorrow. In a country where the situation is so strained, where the revolutionary elements have accumulated to such a degree, where the economic conditions of the enormous mass of people become daily more impossible, where every stage of social development is represented from the primitive commune to modern large-scale industry and high finance, and where all these contradictions are arbitrarily held in check by the unexampled despotism, a despotism which is becoming more and more unbearable to a youth in whom the dignity and intelligence of the nation are united. When 1789 has once been launched in such a country, 1793 will not be far away. So I'm going to kind of end up there. And this 1789 thing, it's interesting how the Communist Revolution is also calling up what happened in the United States of America with their own revolution, American Revolution, resulting in what the United States of America is today. And there's something that Bill Whittle said excellently about the Constitution, and he was wondering, he was just saying, when is it going to come to time when people say, okay, look, with the Constitution and the status of the state of the United States today, the Constitution was either unable to stop what the United States has become, or it was complicit in creating what the United States is today. So these are some things I'm kind of thinking about when people are saying, okay, we need to, like the whole Make America Great Again thing. What is that? Is that just rolling back to what? If you go back to what America was at some point in the past, how is that going to prevent it from coming back to where it is today? If you consider where it is today to be negative, or if you're not quite happy with the direction the country is going in today, if you roll it back to some time in the past, how are you going to prevent it from coming back to this time that we are here today? So I think there's times for something new. Just how back then, when this book was written, these ideas, at a time, they may have been untested actual examples. People were like, okay, yeah, we're trying out capitalism, we're trying out communism, let's see which one works best. There's a lot of things in here where people are talking about, oh no, socialism is separate from communism. And it's clearly written here that I take this as somebody who's rather well studied in the topic, who's saying like, yes, the first step of communism is socialism. We understand there's a process going through this, and just the talk of how they're talking about the people are held down by this system, and this is the same language being repeated by people today. And it's not history repeating itself, it's just that history doesn't necessarily end. History continues to write itself. And I think we're living in a historical time. There was historical times back then. I wonder if this Zarodov character was alive today, if he could see what the world has come to today, if he sees what Venezuela is doing, if he sees how Russia is today, what his thoughts would be, and things like that. So this is a bit of an intermission. I actually decided to read the rest of this first section of this chapter after this. So just bear with me for a little bit longer and I'll get back to the reading. So I have a few other books that I've been finding where I think there's going to be interesting things to kind of read and let you guys know about. Let me know what you guys thought about this. And I might skim through this book and might come back and kind of read different parts. If you guys were rather interested in any of the headlines or subheadings that I went over, maybe you can let me know and I'll consider actually going in and actually reading some more of those. But yeah, just let me know what you guys think about this this book. And do you think communism is actually alive and well in the United States of America? Are you a communist? Do you actually support socialism? Are you one of the people who truly thinks that socialism is completely divorced from communism? And if so, please let me know how you think or how you propose that socialism can come into somewhere like the United States of America and not go all the way into communism. How do you think you're going to get to that point where you're like, okay, we're going to stop it? Because yeah, it says the contemporary problems of the transition from capitalism to socialism. Now, the capitalism is just talking about the actual, I think they're more talking about the actual system of how the country is run, the economic system that is going on in the country. That's what they're talking about, because capitalism itself is not necessarily an ideology. It's just a description of how people do commerce, how people, it's an economical system, and so is socialism. Socialism is also an economic system. And communism is more of an ideology. It's more of an overrunning international thing. It's the way you treat people, the way you look at people, the way you look at status. Whereas in my opinion, capitalism is like, okay, it's just people trading. It's like, if you have something that I want and I can exchange this with you, and then we have a free markets in that way. And I think that one of the main things with capitalism where some people have given good arguments where I can't quite, I'm not the best at actually describing this out, and I should get better at this before I speak out about this. I'm not an expert, most definitely not an expert on this. But with capitalism, if you don't have actual freedom in the capital that you're using, in the ability to say like, yes, I can choose how I'm going to actually exchanges. If I want to do barter trade, if I want to use a different kind of currency, if I want to use some promissory note for me exchanging my physical services, where it's not necessarily like, oh, I give you this book and then you give me like this comb or something. It's going to be a situation where it's like, look, if you give me this book, I'll read to you the entire book or something and whatever. So that kind of exchange of goods and personal. So you don't have a society and a situation where you can do that. And I think to have a fully capitalist system, at least some of the base of it is to have freedom in capital in and of itself. And in everywhere in the world right now, we're using fiat currencies. And that in and of itself is a big handicap to actually having capitalism. So even just from the break of that, let me know what you guys think. That was a bit of a tangent towards the end there. Don't really know. I'm probably going to cut that out, actually. Yeah. The theoretical and practical work accomplished by Marx and Engels was important not only because it was founded on the practical experience of the proletarian struggle in different countries. The potency of the Marxist teaching of revolution also lies in the fact that it was the supreme expression of all preceding and contemporary concepts of social development and was, moreover, indivisible from the other aspects of Marxism, which have creatively absorbed all the achievements of human thought and raised it to a qualitatively new level. The genius of Marx, Lenin wrote in an article headed "The Three Sources and Three Components of Marxism," consists precisely in his having furnished answers to the questions already raised by the foremost minds of mankind. His doctrine emerged as a direct, immediate continuation of the teachings of the greatest representatives of philosophy, political economy, and socialism. Socialist ideas had been propounded long before Marx and Engels, and they had become most widespread in the form of various schools and orientations of utopian socialism, which produced entire socialist and communist concepts containing not only blissful dreams but daring forecasts of the society and man of the future. The exponents of these utopian concepts may be divided into three main groups: utopian communists, utopian socialists, and petty bourgeois socialists. The utopian communists demanded social equality through the abolition of private ownership. Proponents of revolutionary action like François-Émile Babeuf, Theodore Desamis, and Louis-Auguste Blanqui accentuated the importance of propaganda and organizational work among the proletariat and of conspiracies against the existing regime. Failing to understand the entire spectrum of social relations, the utopian communists, for instance, Etienne Cabet, who Marx described as a popular, though very superficial exponent of communism, regarded human nature itself as the foundation for communist society. They began to see the need for eradicating class distinctions and for a class struggle only after the revolutions of the end of the 18th and the middle of the 19th century. By the time Marxism came on the scene, the utopian communists had come to the realization that the road to social equality lay through revolution and the dictatorship of the people, which had to be established to repulse possible counter-revolutionary intrigues. Claude Saint-Simon, Charles Fourier, and Robert Owen, the classical exponents of utopian socialism, likewise believed that the ideals of freedom and equality were unrealizable under capitalism. In their comprehensive and argumented criticism of the capitalist system, they showed that it had to be replaced by socialism. Some of their ideas were later adopted by scientific socialism: planned economy, work by all members of society, abolition of hired labor, the conversion of the state into an instrument regulating economic life, and so on. However, not having a scientific method of analyzing social processes, the utopian socialists could not understand the laws governing historical development, did not see the ways and means of remaking capitalist society into a socialist society, and failed to appreciate the revolutionary role of the proletariat. Quote, "One thing is common to all three," Engels wrote, of Saint-Simon, Charles Fourier, and Owen. "Not one of them appears as a representative of the interests of that proletariat which historical development had, in the meantime, produced. Like the French philosophers, they did not claim to emancipate a particular class to begin with, but all humanity at once." Unquote. The utopian socialists hoped to achieve their socialist ideal gradually by persuasion. Their message was addressed not to the workers, but to the ruling classes. Saint-Simon, for instance, believed that the improvement of scientific knowledge, morals, and religion was the basis of social advancement. The petty bourgeois socialists formulated their views later when capitalist relations had reached a higher development level. They mirrored the sentiment of the small producers who were hit by growth of large-scale capitalist production. They rejected revolutionary methods in favor of reforms. They urged the abolition of large-scale production through the enlargement of cooperatives with state assistance. One of their most outstanding spokesmen, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, created a school that for many years opposed Marxism. When the question of utopian or petty bourgeois socialism comes up, some researchers are inclined to regard them as a past stage of the development of socio-political thought, a stage now belonging to history. But it is not as simple as that. The unscientific theories of utopian socialism of the petty bourgeois socialists continue to be revived by some spokesmen of the petty bourgeois strata that have been drawn into the vortex of the class struggle. That is why, far from having lost its significance today, Marx's and Engels's profound and all-sided criticism of the utopian and petty bourgeois concepts of social development serves Marxists, Leninists, as a dependable guide in the struggle for the revolutionary remaking of modern social life. The theory of revolution, of the transition from capitalism to socialism, evolved by Marx and Engels, showed the road for the then incipient working class movement and illumined the prospects of a revolutionary struggle with the bright light of a scientific analysis. The teaching of Marx and Engels and their concrete revolutionary practice facilitated the development of a massive working class movement and the establishment and consolidation of its first communist organizations. The struggle of the working class in the lifetime of Marx and Engels was a crucial stage in the world revolutionary movement, witnessing the bourgeois revolutions in Europe in 1848, the national movements in Germany and Italy, and the revolutionary situation in Russia in 1859 to 1861. The class struggle was crowned by the world's first proletarian revolution in France in 1871. Marx and Engels sought to give the working class movement correct guidelines and an understanding of its objectives and direct the spontaneous enthusiasm of the masses into the channel of revolution. As a result, their theoretical and practical work, the nascent working class movement, received an invincible weapon. The Marxist theory of revolutionary struggle gradually spread to the workers' organizations and won thousands upon thousands of adherents. The fundamental law of revolutionary development, of transition from capitalism to socialism, revealed by Marx and Engels, have been strikingly confirmed in our day. The successes achieved by socialism have demonstrated that the laws are truly universal. That is why Marxism is called an eternally living, ageless teaching. That is why the references of its enemies to the new features of our times, to the changed character of the epoch, are nothing but pitiful, untenable attempts to refute the laws of revolution. The enemies of socialism and communism aspire to prove that Marxism is a product of the 19th century, when capitalism was quite different. Today they declare, capitalism has changed, and many of its past vices have vanished. The antagonism between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, they claim, has disappeared, and capitalism has become democratic with many socialist elements. It is, they say, becoming a welfare state. This, the champions of capitalism maintain, make it unnecessary to turn the capitalist into the socialist system by means of revolution. Therefore, it is claimed, Marxist theory is obsolete. In a conversation with the author of this book, West German social democrats, notably Helmut Schmidt, tried to prove that of the teaching of Marx, only his economic theory has retained some importance. They asserted that the Marxists ignored the changes taking place in the capitalist world. Here is what Willy Brandt said in Trier on the 150th anniversary of the birth of Marx. Quote, Marx could now foresee that the unity between theoretical knowledge and political practice would change the destiny of the workers in a highly developed industrial country so radically as has indeed happened. What he gave were not patented recipes valid for all time, unquote. However, it was not the Social Democrat Brandt, former chancellor in that part of the country of the great Marx, where some of the world's most powerful monopolies operate today, who was right, but the communists of the first socialist state created in Marx's homeland, the GDR, who were convinced that the author of Capital analyzed not only a specific stage of capitalist development, but the basic processes and laws, the substance of capitalism. As a science, Marxism does not and cannot grow old. It can be enriched, developed, and augmented with a new content. But in the same way that the latest discoveries of modern physics cannot cancel the laws of motion formulated by Isaac Newton, no new experience of the class struggle can cancel the basic laws governing the development of human society, the revolutionary replacement of capitalism by communism discovered by Marxism. Formulated by Marx and Engels, the general laws of social development of the revolutionary transition from capitalism to socialism retain their full significance to this day. Whatever aspect of the theory of revolution we may study, we always proceed from the propositions of Marxism. For example, the historic mission of the working class, consistent champion of the revolution and the principal and decisive force in the struggle to remake capitalist society into socialist and communist society. The need for the proletariat's alliance with other exploited classes, particularly with such a numerous class as the peasantry, and also with the intelligentsia and other strata. The need for the dictatorship of the proletariat during the period of transition from capitalism to socialism. These and other pivotal tenets of Marxism help the communist parties to frame a correct strategy for the struggle even when considerable changes have taken place in society's social structure as a result of the development of state monopoly capitalism. The conclusions of the founders of Marxism underlie the strategic thesis of the communist movement that, as any other social revolution, the socialist revolution is a long process affecting all facets of the life of society. The teaching of Marx and Engels underlies the concept that the victory of socialism in individual countries influences the development of the world revolution and that the entire world revolutionary process is interdependent. The proposition on the leading role of the Communist Party in the period of preparation for the accomplishment of the socialist revolution and during the building of socialism also rests in the ideas propounded by the founders of Marxism. And does not the slogan of the unity of the working class, a unity demanded by Marx and Engels, remain the overriding slogan of the communist movement? Implementation of this slogan makes it possible to achieve success in the revolutionary struggle in capitalist countries and in the building of socialism, and it opens up prospects for the triumph of working people throughout the world. Even when it just appeared and took shape, Marxism displayed its superiority over other theories of social development, winning the ideological battle forced on it. Marx and Engels proved that the right and, quote, left, unquote, varieties of opportunism were untenable. From the right, it will be recalled, the revolutionary theory was attacked by Lassalleanism. This form of opportunism is linked with the name of Ferdinand Lassalle, a leader of the German working class movement, whom to this day the Social Democratic Party of Germany regards as its teacher. Lassalle called for the creation of an independent organization of the working class that would fight for universal suffrage by equal, direct, and secret ballot. Contending that there was no sense in the workers' struggle for higher wages, Lassalle saw the solution in workers' producers' associations, in which the proletariat would be an entrepreneur. Created on the basis of universal suffrage, the people's state would, according to Lassalle, lead to progress and freedom. On this basis, the Lassalleans cooperated with the reactionary chancellor Leopold von Bismarck against the liberal bourgeoisie in the hope of winning suffrage in exchange. Everybody knows what came of this. While subscribing to the idea of an independent organization of the working class, Marx and Engels fought Lassalle's theories, which were unscientific and hostile to the interests of the proletariat. Lassalleanism is most fully exposed in Critique of the Gotha Programme, which subjects to a scathing scientific criticism Lassalle's specious interpretation of the laws of the movement of wages, his idealistic assessment of the role of the class state, and so on. Marx and Engels waged a resolute struggle also against anarchism, one of whose spiritual father was Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. A major result of this struggle was the more profound elaboration of the political teaching of Marxism and of the tactics of the proletariat class struggle. The focal issue was linked with the attainment of socialist objectives: the ways of abolishing the bourgeois state, the revolutionary transformation of society, the forms of collective ownership as the foundation for absolute liberty and equality, and the ways of organizing society after the victory over the bourgeoisie. In the First International, the anarchists, led by Russian petty bourgeois revolutionary Mikhail Bakunin, who was their leading ideologist, were opposed to the authoritarian principle in the organization of society and, above all, to the teaching on the political party of the working class. The struggle which Marx and Engels waged against opportunism in the working class movement was subsequently continued in two directions: against right and against left opportunism. To this day, the communist movement has to fight the reformists among the social democrats and the revisionists in their own ranks against petty bourgeoisie pseudo-revolutionism that leads to anarchism and adventurism. In this struggle, the communist movement draws on the experience of Marx and Engels. Their uncompromising attitude towards any deviation from proletarian theory and their passion and argumentation in providing the truth teach the communists to be flexible and, at the same time, principled in firmly and consistently upholding the general line of the communist movement. For more than a century, historical development has been following the path foretold by Marxist theory. The Marxism of the modern epoch is Leninism, the legitimate successor and continuer of the entire revolutionary theoretical and revolutionary practical cause left to mankind by Marx and Engels. Okay, so thanks for listening. That was me reading from this book, Leninism and Contemporary Problems of the Transition from Capitalism to Socialism. So there's a lot of interesting things in there. I kind of broke out, after reading, that was the introduction and the first section of the first chapter. After reading a part of the first section of that chapter, I gave some comments, just some thoughts. But yeah, just think about this. Think about what is written in this book, what I have read, what you have heard, and what you hear in society today. The people talking about social democrats or people like Bernie Sanders in the United States of America, or just the general ideas and argumentation that people are giving when people tell you, oh, it's not about communism, it's just about helping each other. Don't you care about these people? And how confident they were about the successes of Marxism, of communism, of these ideas in this book. Now, were they right to be confident? Because isn't communism still kind of alive and well in the world? I had attended a few events in the United States of America, and just going to the protests and seeing people just outright giving out communist newspapers and people just with these just these anti-Trump protests, how all these different groups have mixed together and how just the communist movement has just come in, that people actually waving the USSR flag, the World Socialist Party, and people like this, people who are just outright communists. And it's just wow, these people are out here in public discussing these things, espousing these ideas, honestly claiming to believe them, and that's what they want for the world. But also, how many people truly is it? How many people are actually doing this? The percentages of people, I went to a few of these events and would end up seeing kind of the same kind of people to a point where after going to a few in a year, I was like, I recognize you. You're like, hey, what's up? I've seen you before. Where they start like, we know who you are. You're a suspicious person. You're with them. You're one of those Trump people. So I think there was that thing going back and forth. So how many of these people are truly there? How many people sitting at home who are like, yes, I followed Bernie Sanders, have truly read anything about actual communism and actually know the ideas that he's espousing? I think very few. How many of them know what the USSR stands for? How many of them know the relationship between the USSR and the battle it had with fascism, the relation it has with the Nazi Party, which is the German Workers' Socialist Party. Could be wrong about how exactly that's said, but yes, how many people actually know what Nazi stands for outright? How many people know how socialism is actually a part and parcel of communism? I don't think too many people know that. So if you've enjoyed me reading this book, if there's other sections that you might want me to read, or just things in general that you're interested in, let me know what you guys thought about this. I think next week I found this other book. This is going to be another interesting one. The 10 Stupid Things Women Do to Mess Up Their Lives by Dr. Laura Schlesinger. This is from, I think, 1994. It says cover design in 1995 and cover photograph in 1994. So yeah, this is probably, I guess in 96 or something would be latest, 95, 96. But this is going to be the book I'm going to read next. Also going to do the intro of that and maybe a few sections. But yeah, that was it for today. Please like, share, and subscribe. And till next video, goodbye. Yes, thanks for watching. If you did watch, there was a speed drawing going on the screen. It's a piece I did based off of the Childish Gambino This Is America video. Switched out Childish Gambino for Karl Marx and put Uncle Sam on the chair, about to get the headshot. This is a play on, or commentary on, how cultural Marxism has affected American culture and Western culture in general. There will be links below to a merchandise store where you can get merchandise like this. You can help support me on Patreon, pledge $1 or more, or whatever you can. It will help a lot to just help me continue making these videos, continue living, continue thinking, continue trying to find different information, making stuff for you guys out there, producing a better product, and not having to fall back on some socialist welfare state type of program. Goodbye.